So, welcome everyone to the 14th installment of Lifestyle Matters, where today I am interviewing the wonderful Elizabeth Yarnell, who is a naturopath and an MS Thriver. And she and we met at a conference a couple of weeks ago, probably at the start of October. And she gave this amazing Future of Health TED Talk that was 5 minutes of just so much information, so much value. And I wanted her to come and share her story today with you to give you some insight into what could be the underlying cause of some of the conditions or symptoms that you may not have had answers to. So, Elizabeth, I am going to hand over to you and let you tell your story.
Well, hi, Ray. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today and talking about one of my favorite pet topics, which is what is really at the root cause of your symptoms. And oftentimes I think that it could be parasites, and that I think is what our topic is today. But to tell you who I am a traditional naturopath, and I design customized anti-inflammatory programs and other natural therapies to empower people with MS and autoimmune issues to take charge and reclaim their health, because good health is our birthright and each of us are entitled to it. Sometimes it's harder to find than other times, and maybe that's a segue to parasites, but let me start with my own story. So my story started really my story started in the 70s, honestly. But my professional story started one night in 1999 when I went to sleep as usual and I awoke the next morning blind in my right eye. And it turned out I had multiple sclerosis. So MS is an autoimmune disease. It's degenerative. It's marked by chronic inflammation around the myelin sheaths that surround the nerves in our brain and in our body. And this interferes with the synapses that travel across the nerves and direct everything that we do and make us move our hands or think or see or speak or eat or anything like that. All of that depends on synapses. And in MS, the synapses can get disrupted, and that can manifest in disabilities or dysfunctional bodies. And that's where I was in 1999 when I was diagnosed. At that time, doctors told me that 80% of MS patients experience significant disability within 10 years of diagnosis. I was 2 weeks away from my 30th birthday, and the last thing I wanted to think about was being in a wheelchair for my 40th birthday. So I knew I needed to do something to help myself. My MS doctors told me, you know what, there's nothing you can do to help yourself. In fact, one of my MS doctors has this chart on his wall, and it is the course of multiple sclerosis. And it's literally a straight downhill slope. And he said, you can start off at the top where normal people are, but you are going to go directly down to the bottom of the slope, just like everybody else with MS, and experience significant disabilities along the way. And I thought, I just can't sit back and accept that. And I said to him, well, what if I change my diet and exercise my body and my brain? And he says, well, it doesn't matter. You might be able to stay up at the top for a little bit longer, but you're still going to end up at the bottom of the slope, just like everybody else with MS. Needless to say, that was one of the most depressing days of my life. I went home and I cried for 6 hours after that. But afterwards, I picked myself up and I said, okay, well, there has to be something I can do to make my future better, because honestly, at the end of the day, it matters most to me how my future is, not to these doctors or anybody else. And it was actually my fiance at the time, who's now my husband of 20 some years. He was a competitive athlete and he was already into cooking from scratch and organic foods. At that time, he had just completed the world snowshoeing event and came in 6th in the world in snowshoeing, running up and down a mountain in snowshoes. And he said, I have to tell you that your diet is crap. And maybe that has something to do with why you got sick. And I looked at him and I thought, he probably has a point. for the entire decade of my 20s, I had lived on my own and I was a girl on the go. I either ate fast food or at a restaurant, or I just really skipped the meal. The only staple foods I kept in my apartment at that time were Crystal Light, Diet Coke, and gummy bears. So,
Oh my God, I can relate. I can totally relate to that.
the end of that, I can't tell you what a gummy bear fiend I used to be. So all of that is just toxic stew, really. It's artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, artificial colors, no nutrients really to speak of. So maybe not a huge surprise that at the end of a decade of living like that, that my body would fail on me. So I thought, okay, but I don't know what a healthy diet is, and I really don't know how to cook. So I started researching places through like the ADA and the Mayo Clinic, and really what everything seemed to come down to was that whole foods were better than processed foods. And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense because processed foods have a ton of chemicals and other additives and preservatives in them. So maybe this is a solution for me. And I thought, okay, I'm willing to do a whole foods based diet, but I still don't know how to cook. So I started taking cooking classes and watching the Food Network, which was in its infancy at the time. And the more I got in the kitchen and played around, the more I realized that the reason convenience foods were invented is because cooking from whole foods all the time is just tremendously time intensive and labor intensive, not to mention the cleanup afterwards in the kitchen. Fatigue is a hallmark of MS. And that really was making it hard for me to follow this whole foods based diet. So one night, my husband and I were watching late night TV. It was in the days before we had cable, and this infomercial comes on, and this man says, "Look, I can make your whole meal in this one countertop appliance." And he takes a can of tomatoes and dry rice, and he puts it in the bottom of this countertop appliance, and then he puts metal grates on it, like barbecue grill type grates, puts chicken breasts on there, and then another barbecue grill type grate, and then brownies on the top of that, covers the whole thing with a dome, plugs it in and turns it on. Very I Dream of Genius. And I thought, wow, that is brilliant. I really want to make my own meal in one countertop, one pot, basically. But I didn't have that countertop appliance. I didn't have any of those metal grates, and I didn't really care about the brownies. So I went over to my oven and I thought, that countertop appliance probably gets pretty hot. And I cranked it up to 450 degrees. And I had a cast iron Dutch oven as a wedding gift that I hadn't used before. And I thought, maybe I'll just try this. And I pulled out some frozen fish and some fresh vegetables and threw it in there, and then closed the lid, put it inside the oven. And in about half an hour, it just started to smell like dinner. And that became the way that we cooked. And I didn't really even think that much of it until my college roommate came to visit for a week. And at the end of the week, she asked me, "Would you please teach me how to cook like you cook?" And I thought, well, you've seen me do it. I really just throw things into the cast iron Dutch oven and then put them in the oven. And she said, "I think there's a little bit more to it than that." So that's when I sat down and I wrote out my cookbook, Glorious One Pot Meals. And I found out that the method of cooking that I was using was so unique that I could apply for a patent. And so I was granted actually a process patent on this method of cooking, which I detail in my cookbook that you can see over my shoulder there, Glorious One Pot Meals. And for a long time, I really went through life and thinking, I think maybe the secret to health is whole foods are better than processed foods. But then my son was born, and he was really sick from the day he came into this world. And he would projectile vomit all the time, like 7 to 15 times a week. He had terrible constipation. Sometimes he would go for 10 days between bowel movements. He was just a very sad little baby because he was in so much pain, and nothing I could do could help him. I made all of his baby food. He ate only organic food. But we took him to pediatric GI clinics. We had his DNA mapped. We did abdominal x-rays, and nothing that we did was showing any solutions. I was really concerned about him. I was already studying at this time to become a naturopath, but I hadn't graduated yet. So I took him to see another naturopath. And she said, I really think this sounds like food sensitivities. And I said, he doesn't have allergy, he doesn't have anaphylaxis or hives. And she said, those are food allergies. She said, I'm talking about food sensitivities that cause inflammation in the body. I don't know what else to do. Let's do it. And we did the test. And a full 1/3 of the items that came up that were tested came up reactive for him. It was amazing. Even now that I've done hundreds of these tests, his was still the worst I've ever seen. But as soon as we changed his diet to eliminate those things, it was amazing. At this point, he had fallen off the height and weight chart, as you can imagine. He was just vomiting all his food. But he stopped vomiting. He started pooping regularly. Within 2 months, he had gained 10 pounds and grown 1.5 inches. He started sleeping through the night. He stopped wetting his bed. He became just a happier kid. And I thought, when I get my degree as a naturopath, this is what I want to do. I want to offer this food sensitivity testing because this really feels like so central to health is to remove the inflammation and the inflammatory triggers from your body. And so that's what I did when I started my clinic in 2011, helping people with MS and other autoimmune issues by designing customized, personalized anti-inflammatory diets. But I realized along the way that sometimes there were other factors at work. And this is really where I come into my part of the story that I shared at the conference with Ray. And this is about parasites. So personally, I have been infected with parasites at least 6 or 7 times that I know of in the course of my life. One of the most dramatic was one night in 1998 when we had just come down off the mountains, off of the Eastern Tibetan Plateau, where we had spent 2 weeks on a horseback trip camping out with the horses in this amazing place, the Eastern Tibetan Plateau, nomads, and it was just fantastic. And we came down to Chengdu, China, which is a major cosmopolitan city, and we had a feast at a 4-star restaurant. We met for the restaurant. There were about 15 of us. We met at 6 p.m. for this amazing dinner, multi-course dinner that they served us. But by midnight, 12 of us were worshiping the porcelain gods. It hit fast and furious. In fact, several of the people had to delay their departure flights out the next day because they were on rehydration IVs because they had been so violently ill. When I got back to Colorado, I sent my stool sample off to get the laboratory and get tested, and it made its way to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. And one day I received a panicked phone call from the CDC asking me, well, where did you pick up all of these parasites? They had found 5 different parasites in my stool. Those are just the ones that they found, they were able to identify. They said, could there be an outbreak in Colorado? And I said, no, I just came back from Asia, where I'm sure I picked them up. I've been sick since then. And they thought, okay, well, that's okay. But the thing is with parasites, if you don't address them directly, they live in your body. The job of a parasite is to move in, find a host, move in, take up residence, and populate, multiply, and live happily ever after, feeding off the host. So the definition of a parasite or a parasitic relationship is that the parasite benefits, but the host doesn't receive any benefit from this. We sometimes think, oh, well, maybe there's some beneficial parasites. There are not. There are beneficial bacteria. We call them probiotics. They live in our gut. They're part of our digestive tract. They do important jobs, but there are no beneficial parasites. If they were beneficial, they would be called a symbiotic relationship where both the host and the parasite benefit. But the whole word parasite means only the parasite benefits. So that's really, that was a huge eye-opening experience for me. And I realized that I had actually been infected with parasites for the whole decade of my 20s, because back when I was 21, I had taken a 3-day train ride from Budapest to Istanbul. And in the middle of it, we had run out of water. And when the train pulled into Sofia, Bulgaria, the conductor said, you have 3 minutes to run off and fill up your water bottles at this public fountain. I mean, it's seriously like a public, I look back, I'm like, how could we even think we could do this? Filled it up at this public fountain. And that was that was the time before that I picked up a whole bunch of parasites. But I lived with those parasites in my body for 10 years, my normal, that I only every 4 or 5 days, or when I'm pooping, it's diarrhea. And I just thought, this is just my normal. And I didn't really think that much of it. But after I started treating myself for the parasites I picked up in China, I was able to see, wow, everything is different. And the last 10 years of my life were not normal. There were parasites in there that were affecting my health. But after we came back from China and I realized I had all these parasites and I started trying to address them, just a short while later, my fiance and I were at a restaurant, and it was a cold fall day that was kind of wet and steamy. And we went into the restaurant, which was hot and sweaty and crowded and packed with people. And I fainted. I had never fainted in my life before. And I thought, well, that's really weird. I feel just so weak and emptied out from the anti-parasite medicine that the doctor had given me. Just felt like a hollowed out eggshell, like I had no substance in my body. And then it was only a couple months later that I experienced that morning when I woke up and without my eyesight.
I've heard it before, but now I've got like the whole backstory to like what was going on in your 20s. And then the fact that you've been infected multiple times, but no one sort of was able to help you heal properly from that. So I have a couple of questions. Actually, I have several questions, but one I want to ask about like what happened with your naturopathic school. So, you talk like now you run like food sensitivity testing. So I'm curious about that. So when you were training as a naturopath, were you trained in running specific labs and those things as like the starting point? Because as a functional health practitioner, like lab testing is like the like we begin there. We start with functional labs before anything else happens. Is that also how things work for you?
I think it is how a lot of naturopathic doctors start, but that wasn't part of my training. I had to really seek out outside of my schooling to learn about food sensitivity testing and learn about parasites. That really wasn't part of my training either, just as it's not part of our regular medical school training in this country. And in fact, doctors are not trained at all to think about parasites, suspect them, or even look for them. The really unfortunate part that is that even if they do look for parasitic infection, parasite testing is notorious for false negatives. So you can get a test, and if it turns out positive, fantastic. 100% you've got a parasite in you. But if it turns out negative, there's still a 50-50 chance that you got it. And honestly, with my clients, I don't even send them in for testing because I don't want them to think I'm clear I don't have parasites when I think they probably do. And they need to go through the herbal protocol and clear them out before we move forward.
So I love that we've talked about this because this was my experience. I knew in 2009, I'd gone on a trip to Trinidad where I am right now. And by the time I'd left, I remember thinking, I was like, I picked something up. I've got a parasite. And this was long before functional medicine, long before I knew anything about what I know now. So I didn't study functional medicine until 2016. So I went to my regular doctor and I said, hey, I have a parasite. And he just laughed at me when I got back to the UK. He said, don't be crazy. You don't have a parasite. And I said, well, could you check? He's like, I can't check. Like he said, if you feel like you've got one, just go to Boots, which is the chemist, the pharmacy. So just go to Boots and get one of those 3-day cleanses. Do like a Paragon or whatever those things are. And I was like, okay, I'll go do that. And I did. And I don't think I really felt any better, but for like that was 2009, 2010. And then I saw a nutritional therapist in 2011, right around the same time I'd seen the gastroenterologist who said, I think you have candida, but there's nothing really wrong with you. It must be in your head. And you should probably see a psychiatrist. which was her way of like
Oh my God.
yeah, she's like just dismissing me, right? So which was very distressing because I'm like, I'm not crazy and I'm not making up stomach pain and cramping and constipation. Like you don't make that up. So
Right.
or imagine it. There's why would anyone invent this? So by the time 2016 came around and I started running the GI map is the lab that was run on me, and it picked up a whole bunch of things. It wasn't just the parasite. And that's the thing I want people to know. Parasites don't travel alone. They bring friends. They want a party in your digestive tract, right? And and they usually, there's this thing called biofilm where things tend to hide. So even if you did a traditional stool test with your doctor, like I did with my gastroenterologist, I did that with her. I did it with two different GPs and also a nutritional therapist, and it was in the GI map, and it didn't find any parasites. It found Candida, and that was and something called Pseudomonas, which was very unpleasant, I have to say. And when we worked on the Pseudomonas, things cleared up. A lot of things cleared up, but I was still super sensitive to certain things. And I knew, I'm like, well, I'm not 100%. So, and I know I can be, like, I actually believe that. And I know a lot of people have been told that they have to live with their IBS, or they have to live with their anxiety, or they've got to live with their panic and their insomnia and just maybe take a pill to go along with it. Now, you and I are from a very different school of thought. And I've made it my mission to awaken people to the fact that this is not something that you have to live with. It may be common, but it is not normal, and that you can return to a state of normalcy or arrive there if you've never even been there. Because, some of it, like your poor son, he didn't know what normal was, the poor thing,
Right.
like struggling from birth, like with all these reactions. So, we can get you to a state of what normal and healthy and vibrant and energized and joyful actually is if you test and don't guess. So interesting to hear about the naturopathic training not having the food sensitivities included. I'm sure things are probably different now, but back
They probably are.
yeah, I think they probably are different now, but back then. So now as part of your practice, like I know we were only going to be doing this for like half an hour. So I feel like we've got about 5 to 10 minutes and I want to extract some more nuggets. And no, it's wonderful because we got so much information in that last, when you were talking, stuff that is mind blowing, stuff that would, I hope, awaken people and get them to start thinking like, hey, maybe all these unexplained or unconnected things, maybe they're actually connected. Maybe there's something at the root of all of it. Maybe I need to go and investigate, because very often we get complacent and we just think, yeah, we adapt. Humans adapt very quickly to not being well. We adapt really, really well to being unwell and just saying, oh, well, it's just I'm getting older. Oh, I've just got a couple aches, a couple pains. Oh, those migraines, they're just part of my monthly cycle, whatever. They're not. There's more. There are clues. There's signs. It's a fire alarm. And, taking the pill is just putting out the fire alarm and not putting out the fire. We want you to put out the fire. So you want to reach out to someone. So Elizabeth, in your experience, what would be the number one piece of advice that you would give to someone who might be experiencing some of the things that you've experienced? What are the clues that they should be looking out for?
Well, first of all, if your doctor tells you it's all in your head, but there are physical symptoms, then you need to leave that doctor and take your own health into your own hands, because that just means that they don't understand. There's something they can't identify. I can't tell you how many of my clients are like, well, my doctor ran a bunch of tests. They all came back negative. And so my doctor says, it must be stress. You're manifesting it yourself. It is not. I just watched a really interesting documentary on Amazon Prime called Morgellons Disease. And that the whole documentary is all about this, that all these doctors call these people delusional, but really they are infected with parasites. So how can you think that maybe you're infected with parasites? Well, if you change your diet, but you're still sick, that's a big part of it. Parasites can manifest, again, as gut issues, but not all parasites live in the gut. Some of them live in your muscles. Some of them live in your heart, in your brain, in your liver. They can live in your lungs. They can live everywhere. There's one parasite called Chagas, which comes out of South America. And the only way that you can identify Chagas in the lab is if there's only like 2 or 3 labs in the entire United States that do this test. It's a specific blood test. They have to mix the blood with a special medium and look at it under a certain microscopic power in order to find the parasite and even see it. Most people don't even get a blood test when they're looking for parasites. but they don't even live in an area where they have Chagas testing anyway. So it wouldn't even matter, which is why I don't even advocate testing. Don't test, just treat. And the way I advocate treating is an herbal parasitic protocol for at least 1 month. 3 days will do nothing for you. Those mixes of like 30 different ingredients that say this is anti-parasitic and you take 1 pill a day, that is not enough. You really super have to saturate your tissues. The protocol that I use is a 30-day protocol, and there are days that you are taking 12 or 15 capsules of supplements on that day to really do that. Not only do you have to address the adult parasites, you have to address all phases of their life cycle. That's adult and the larvae, which are like the teenagers, and the eggs. Some parasites lay 2,000 eggs a day. So if you just kill off the parasites, sooner or later, the eggs that are left are going to repopulate and you're going to be infected again. So parasite infestation, anytime you have mysterious symptoms and you can't figure out why. For my husband, I remember one time he was sound asleep and he woke up, and before he even lifted his head off the pillow, he was spewing vomit across in an arc. I remember another time when I was sitting in the kitchen or in the living room watching TV, and all of a sudden I heard a thump thump. And I went over, and he had gone to the fridge to get a drink, and he had fainted in front of the fridge. The fridge was open. He was flat on the floor. Sometimes parasites can cause headaches. They can cause all sorts of muscle issues, tremors, and weaknesses. But don't forget, too, that parasites have a consciousness and they can influence the host's behavior and actions. So they can even influence the host not to address the parasites and to continue on living without addressing them, so that the parasites can live on. It's really just an amazing thing. Leaky gut is a huge indication of potential parasitic infestation because the parasites literally burrow through your tissues and make their own pathways. It's less like a Bridgerton episode where they're promenading down through the wide avenues of your intestines, and more like one of those ant farms behind glass that we used to see as kids, where the ants just make their pathways wherever they want.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this, because some of the things that I've seen and obviously that I've experienced personally was I was extremely tired. In terms of signs and symptoms, like the lack of energy, I used to tell people it would take me 2 hours to peel myself out of bed. And when I told the doctors that, they're like, "Oh, you're depressed. Here, take an antidepressant." I'm like, "No, I'm
It's
not
all in
depressed.
your head.
Like, I'm not depressed. I'm exhausted and something's sucking my energy." And I was sleeping, but I'm like, I'm still waking. So that's another clue. If you are sleeping, but you are waking up exhausted, something is up, right? And because when people say, "Oh, I'm getting like,"
or you have trouble sleeping.
That's another one. Or if you're waking at that 2 a.m., right, 3 a.m., that witching hour, I call it.
Yes, that's a big one.
And if it acts up around the full moon, they respond. They all start to party around the full moon as well. So if you notice, some people say, "Oh," and this is going to get really gross, but like they say, "Oh, sometimes like my butt is itchy around the full moon." And I'm like, bingo, like you've got stuff. We need to work on that.
That is a classic parasite symptom, right?
Parasite.
I remember when I was infected with parasites when I was 8 years old, my father, who's a doctor, I had that exact symptom of the itchy butt, and he took a piece of cellophane tape and taped it over my anus, spread apart my anus, taped the tape over it right before I went to bed. And in the morning, he took the tape off, and there were worms attached to it.
Oh my God.
So that can be a home test too.
Well, I was going to say, I'm not recommending people do that one, because Lord knows what they end up dealing with. So I'd prefer if we just go work with someone. And if you want to get the stool testing, great. If not, you can start with some of the herbal protocols. I love using things like biocidin, GI microbex. And there are ways to do these things too, because you don't just go out and randomly start taking things, which is why you don't DIY your health. You don't DIY your car, so don't DIY your body. Please, you're not going to go and pretend you know how to fix your car. So please don't go and pretend you know what you're doing. I was like, "Oh, it's just supplements and they're benign." They're not. they have specific uses and they need to be used under the supervision of someone who is trained in how to use them. So that's my parting words to people today. Because I get a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I tried this and I tried that and it didn't work. I'm like, well, how long did you try it for?
Well, just like you went to Boots and bought some Parasite thing at Boots, but it was only 3 days and it wasn't really effective.
And the doctor didn't really understand parasites, because if he did, he would have he would have said, well, let's run a stool test. And he didn't want to. He's just like, well, if you think you've got one, just go take this thing.
The fact that he just dismissed your travel history too, because foreign travel is a big indicator, especially if you've been in undeveloped places. But it's not the only one. You can pick up parasites through eating sushi from a salad bar that didn't wash their produce well enough. You can get them from swimming in rivers or lakes or even public pools or water parks. Chlorination doesn't necessarily kill off all the parasites. Every summer I see Giardia infestations at public pools. You can get them from walking barefoot. There are parasites that come up through the soles of your feet. You can get them from playing with your pets, from changing the kitty litter box. There's a very, very common parasite called T. gondii that comes through the kitty litter box. And I just heard a stat that said 60 million people probably have T. gondii in their brains right now. So I know we're running close on time, but I want to follow up on what you were talking about the mental symptoms. It could be anxiety, panic attacks. It could be schizophrenia. I think schizophrenia is a parasitic infection. It could be depression. It could be all sorts of mental issues, irrationality, irritability, that we're not connecting all the dots.
I couldn't agree with you more. So I feel like that is probably the most powerful thing. Like, we want people to think like, well, how do I, if you're feeling overwhelmed by like, oh my God, there's just so much to consider, don't be, because there are answers and there are people who are going to help you drill things down so that it becomes easier and more palatable for you to actually understand what's going on with your body and to guide you through it. And it may take 6 weeks, it might take 3 months, it might take 6 months. It depends. And it will all depend as well, because one size does not fit all. So, the 4-week protocol, that might work for some people. But if you're like super, like you said, I don't want to say infested because that sounds really wrong. But
I say infested because that's true.
True. Like, if you're infested, you want to work with someone who actually understands that and who's actually going to start looking at the whole, like you said, like that doctor should have paid attention to the fact that I just come back from a tropical country where, the water is not amazing. And it's not just chlorinated water. Like you said, it's, rivers, lakes, all sorts of things, well water, all those kinds of things. So I want people to be thinking of, and it's weird that I get excited about like hearing all the different ways. Like, oh, we need to be mindful of all of this stuff too. Like, even when you go and you get your green juice, which was one of the things for me, like, you don't know what they're washing your vegetables in. You don't know where the vegetables have come from, because if they're using animal, manure, like you just don't know. So these are all things to consider, which is why some people say pasteurization is better than going raw. I disagree. Like, there are ways you can clean your produce so that you don't end up with parasites on it. So that could be a whole other discussion or a talk that we could do. But I feel like you've given so many pearls, so many nuggets. And there are 2 people who've tuned in and logged into this. This is meant to be streaming to Facebook as well, but I can't see the Facebook questions. So if the 2 people who are on right now have any questions and they want to pop them into the chat, that would be kind of awesome. And then we can let everybody go enjoy their evening, afternoon, lunch, wherever you are. Not sure. We've got a bit of a global audience. I know Catherine's in Bristol in the UK. Catherine, are you on muting? I can see that you might be. Nope. Yes, you are. Yeah. Hi.
Hello. Yeah, it was really interesting, Elizabeth. Thank you. Really helpful for me, because I'm working with Ray actually, and it looks like I've got quite a bit of infestation going on one way or another. But you mentioned about the sort of lung symptoms, and that's been my problem really, is like breathing difficulties and lung issues. And Ray suspects that's probably the mold that's causing that, or the like candida. Do you think was something you've seen before, where people struggle with their breathing? And I've been bedbound since May, so it's been really difficult. Even just walk across the room is just a bit too much at the moment. So I don't know if that's something you've seen.
Is that all of these things like mold and candida they live in our bodies anyway. And normally our microbiome is balanced out so that everything has its own space. But nature abhors a vacuum. So when parasites come in, they create a vacuum. They created open space, a void in your microbiome. And that's when candida can fill in that space and overgrow. And that's when the fungus can take hold. And because normally we're exposed to fungus all the time and we just process it out and it's fine. But that's, if the microbiome is damaged to begin with, that's when all of those things can really take hold and flourish. So for someone who has breathing issues, I would do a 3-step program. The first step that I would do is an herbal parasite protocol, and let's just clear the playing field and see if that helps. But even if it doesn't, there's only so much better you can get when you have parasites. So the good thing about the herbs is that they're very, very gentle and they don't disrupt the microbiome. They only address parasites. They don't do anything with the good bacteria or anything else that's living in there. Then the next step that I would do is a personalized anti-inflammatory diet, because we want to clear out the random triggers of inflammation that could be causing your lungs to become inflamed and impede your breathing. And then at that point, then we might want to look at adding in some other supports for your lungs. That might include herbs. We definitely want some digestive support. We want to heal your gut because leaky gut is going along with all of this. But that would be my first step. There's a number of different herbs, and there's one that is escaping my mind right now that is specifically helpful for lung issues. There's a number of them. But that's when I would bring in herbal support. But, it's almost a waste to bring in herbal support too soon, because if there are parasites there, then it doesn't matter what else you do. The parasites are still going to kind of be at the top of the heap.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we are doing. We're sort of working on, bacterial infections, parasites, and then getting to things like the mold and the candida. So we're going through it. You're right, 3 steps. Luckily, she didn't have any H. pylori, which was amazing, but there were a bunch of other things that we're working through right now. And there's a lot. It's not just that. There's some other detox issues that need to be addressed as well. So we've been working. But yeah, 15 supplements a day, more like 15 supplements like every couple of hours right now. But
you have to make sure that you can absorb and assimilate the supplements. So a lot of that has to do with doing everything you can initially to get yourself uninflamed, to find the low-hanging fruit, the things that are definitely causing inflammation. Sometimes it's something you're eating every day. I know that at one point in my life, I was having a headache every day and I couldn't figure it out, what was going on. And then I went away for a week and the headaches went away. And when I came back home, I started my usual routine, which was decaf coffee in the morning with some vanilla almond milk. And as soon as that afternoon, the headache came back. And I realized that one of my huge sensitivities right now is artificial, they're called natural flavors. And so anything that has natural flavors, which is this huge loophole in our world, because it really means a combination of God knows how many chemicals that they don't have to elucidate and delineate. They can just call it natural flavors, and they can even put it in organic foods. So it's everywhere these natural flavors are, even something as benign as a flavored carbonated water, like a La Croix or something like that, with a natural flavor in it. And you're like, oh, this is such a great option. It's better than a soda, right? It's just carbonated water and a flavor. There's nothing bad in it. Those natural flavors are so deadly to me and many of my clients. And I can always tell if I accidentally had some, because the next day my eyelids will start to peel.
You get like your skin starts to flake. Is that what you're saying?
On my eyelids.
Oh, wow.
I'll be like, wow, what is all of this all over my eyelids? Like little white, it's flakes,
like
skin flakes.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. So,
and if I continue to eat it, then it'll eventually do huge flakes and then be bloody underneath.
Whoa. Okay. So that's interesting. Really, really interesting. I think people, again, something else like the skin, no one ever connects that with the microbiome or with things like, food sensitivities. Like they're just like, oh, you got really dry skin. Like, no, it could be a number of things, and when you go to a dermatologist, they just work on the topical. They're not looking at the internal. So they're sort of like, oh, if your skin's flaking, then maybe we just get you some kind of, I don't know, some
cortisone cream or something.
I was going to say some paraffin based cream, some petrochemical or like some cortisone rather than let's figure out, well, why is your skin flaking? Like, is it a food sensitivity? Like, should you not be having natural flavors or do you have a fat absorption problem? That's another important one because, and I have a really fabulous family because right now my mom's so unwell. Like we are dealing with all the things like, bodily fluids, everything. So we're going through all of that. And, my dad and I are laughing. He said, well, we never thought we'd talk about poop this much. And I'm like, I said, dude, I do it for a living. I talk about it every day. And he says,
Me too.
I said, actually, I kind of enjoy it now. You'd never think that I would have like 10, 15 years ago. I was one of the most squeamish people you'd ever meet. But now I'm kind of like the first question I ask people, like, how often are you going? What does it look like? Does it float? And they're like,
that has to be the first question.
Yeah. They're like, why do you want to know all that? I'm like, because that's going to tell me like, what color is it? Like, what does it do? Like, is it floating? Is it swimming? Is it sinking? Is it?
But let me tell you, in the 23 years that I've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and all of the medical specialists that I've seen, no one has asked me about my bowels. But when in my clinic, I find that most autoimmune sufferers have a history of dysfunctional bowels.
And of course, like I hear about it all the time, people with Parkinson's, people with dementia, people with, and of course, these psychoneurological issues as well. If you've got depression or anxiety, everyone has got problems with, reflux or bloating or diarrhea or constipation, and they don't tend to have regular bowel habits. So, I hope that the people who are listening to this are not freaked out by us getting all excited about what goes on with your bathroom habits, but they're such big clues. And it's such a simple, easy way to self-test that, what's working and what isn't. Are you pooping more than once a day? That's a sign that things are working. Or are you going once every 3 days? Or like your poor son once, I've worked with a lady who was in her 60s and she was constipated since she was 13 years old, 13 years old, she'd been constipated. She claimed when she came to see me that it was because of her marriage. She said, it's my husband. He's driving me crazy. He's making me really stressed out and I can't go to the bathroom and I have to take a laxative whenever I need to go. And of course we start digging. I did a little hypnosis and stuff with her and came up with the fact that she'd had a trauma when she was 13. She'd been abused when she was 13 years old. And literally ever since then, she'd been holding her shit in, like, cause she was so angry about what had happened to her and afraid, and had been living in that fight or flight state for 50 something years, for nearly, 52 years. She'd been living in that state. So it was interesting. Like, so yes, there are parasites. There's also like emotional trauma that can drive some of these things. So, the one size fits all approach could never work. You need to find someone who's going to ask you the kinds of questions that practitioners like us ask. Like we ask, like, well, what's going on in your life? Like, who are you? Where have you been? What have you been doing? Who are you interacting with? Like,
what were you doing when this all started?
Exactly. That's one of the first questions. What was happening when this all began? What do you think was the trigger? And like with my mom, her naturopathic doctor asked her the other day, she's like, why do you think you have cancer? Why? And she can't answer her because she doesn't have that level of awareness to like be that introspective. But I'm hoping that it's planting a seed for her to start thinking, because she just thinks it's something that's been done to her and not something that she's had a role in, or that her lifestyle might, the fact that she loved eating lots of junk food and ordering, but you did that in your 20s. She's been doing that her whole life, because in the Caribbean, that's like a status symbol to be able to order out all the time and to go out for restaurant meals constantly and to be eating out constantly. So for her, it's like, well, she's like, I'm never going to give that up, because that's the mark of a good life. Even now, and I'm kind of like, your good life is killing you, but that's a whole other story for another time. And I just have to be very patient with her and be very kind to her right now, because she is struggling. And I want people who are not necessarily in that headspace, because she's an older lady. So she's, she probably doesn't think about the world the way that you and I might, and is not always looking for lessons. But if something has shown up in your life, one of the first things you should ask is like, well, why do I think I have this? Where might it have come from? How might I have participated in its creation? Did I take a trip and I drank bad water? Like, because there is something, like, we're involved in these things. They don't just happen. Or like I had a client once say to me, he said, "Oh, I just stopped sleeping." I'm like, "No, you didn't. Like, you didn't one day just stop sleeping." And I was like, just take me back in time. Tell me exactly what was happening when you stopped sleeping. And he'd been traveling. His circadian rhythms were messed up. He'd gone from Australia to London multiple times, and he'd been on multiple rounds of antibiotics. Because he kept getting ill while he was traveling. So they just kept dosing it up with antibiotics. And then, of course, between his gut microbiome getting wrecked, overgrowth of bacteria, of like non-helpful bacteria, the travel disrupting him, I was just like, and then he stopped sleeping. I was like, it didn't just happen. It happened over like 3 or 4 months of you going back and forth. And so we have a role to play in what's going on. And sometimes our illness is there to either awaken us, like literally wake us into like, I need to pay attention to my body. And I feel like that's probably what's happened with you. It's definitely what's happened with me. And it's led us to our higher purpose. It's led us to the work that we're meant to be doing in the world. And I really feel like we were supposed to do this for half an hour. And I looked at the time, I'm like, oh my God, we're still going. And we could keep going. We're supposed to stop like 20 minutes.
We could talk forever, Ray.
We really could. Like when I met you, I was just like, oh my God, I just want to sit down and talk to you all day. I was like, can I interview you? And then we can just make it something that everybody else can benefit from as well.
Which is perfect. Yes. Yeah.
So any parting words like that? Because I do think, I'm sure people have things to do. Are there any parting words that you'd like to leave, or sage, wisdom, advice that you want to give people?
Well, I think that if you have been to all of the doctors and they can't find anything and they don't understand what's going on, then it's time to look for a different approach and to find someone different. And although I deal with parasites and food sensitivities very much in my clinic, I also deal with a lot of other things, because once we clear that playing field and we remove the extraneous things, we can really see more about what might else be going on really in the body. And that's when we can find things that are like, you know what, your kids are having trouble filtering, or I think you have actually a physical problem, an injury that caused a spinal fluid leak that has been causing all your problems for the last 1.5 years that your doctors tell you is in your head. So sometimes there's a physical reason behind everything, but we can't even get there until we remove everything else that might be causing inflammation.
Fantastic. Wonderful way to wrap up. How can people find you, Elizabeth? How do they find you? How do they connect with you?
So if you bear with me, let me give you a couple different ways. The first and most primary way to get in touch with me is always through my website at elizabethyarnell.com, YARNELL, or you can see it on my screen right there. And if you go there at the bottom in the footer, it says book a naturopathic health assessment. And that is a complimentary service that I offer anyone who is interested in working with me, or even just wanting to find out more about different approaches for their health. Right now, I have a Black Friday special going on my flagship program. Unfortunately, it is only for people who live in North America, Catherine. I'm sorry, because the labs I work with are in the US. But if you go to inflammationinvestigator.com, you can see this Black Friday sale pricing that I have going on for my program. But if you're really just interested in parasites, I have a website, parasitesandautoimmunity.com, and you can learn more about what's going on there. And that is something that I can work with people anywhere in the world, because that's just an herbal protocol that I can ship to you. So you just end up paying a little bit more for shipping, but it doesn't entail all the laboratory tests that I do with my US patients.
Awesome. That's really, really cool. So everyone, you can tune in, catch Elizabeth, find her on Instagram, sign up for her. Black Friday's in like a couple of weeks, right? So everyone's getting ready for that. So please connect with her, follow her, stalk her. Don't stalk her. I'm kidding.
Stop me online. That's fine.
Find her online and just tune in to all the things that she is, all the gifts that she's giving to the world. She's giving so much of herself in order to be able to help heal people. So please tap into that. And thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us. We went well over our half an hour slot, but such a fascinating conversation. I would love to do it all again. And go even deeper the next time. So you just let me know when, Elizabeth, and we can do that. So, and to
me too, Ray.
Yeah, fun. It was so much fun. And for everyone who has tuned in, wherever you are, like I know, Catherine, it's late where you are. It's like 8:00 or very close to 8 p.m. I hope you get a really good night. Laura, I can't see you. You're off camera, but thank you for joining. And for those on Facebook, thank you so much as well. We will be back in a week with the next installment of Lifestyle Matters, where I'm interviewing Dr. Nina Fuller-Chevelle, who is an integrative oncologist. And she reversed her own breast cancer. And now she's helping women in the UK do the same thing with an integrative cancer clinic. So thanks, everyone. And see you all very, very soon. Have a great rest of your day.